Young black doctor changes bandage of millionaire woman in coma. Shockingly, she woke up and the air on the 40th floor of the Finch and Sterling headquarters was thin and electric, charged with the palpable tension of a high-stakes gamble. It was a space designed to project power, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a god's-eye view of the Chicago skyline. But today, the city was shrouded in a moody veil of rain, the glass streaked with rivulets that looked like tears. The weather mirrored the oppressive atmosphere inside the main boardroom, where 30 of the firm's brightest minds were gathered. They stood in a semicircle of forced reverence around a massive, intricately detailed scale model of the Solstice Tower, the billion-dollar project that carried the weight of the firm's future on its miniature shoulders. Marcus Thorne, the senior project manager, conducted the room like a maestro of ego. His suit, a tailored armor of charcoal gray, was immaculate. His smile was a carefully calibrated instrument, designed to charm and disarm. He glided along the length of the mahogany table, his reflection a fleeting ghost on its polished surface. "As you can see," he began, his voice resonating with a practiced, theatrical confidence, "the design is not merely a building. It's a statement, a monument to modern ambition, flawless in its execution." His gaze, sharp and restless, swept across the faces of his team, assessing loyalty and noting any flicker of dissent. Then, like a predator isolating its target, his eyes settled on Ilara Vance. She stood near the back, a figure of quiet composure, her presence almost blending into the shadows cast by the immense architectural models lining the wall. "Ah, Ilara," Marcus called out, his voice suddenly infused with a syrupy, patronizing tone that sliced through the room's tension. The shift was deliberate, designed for an audience. "The clients will be arriving in an hour. I've noticed a few stray fingerprints on the presentation boards. Be a dear and give them a polish, would you?" A collective, silent intake of breath seemed to suck the remaining oxygen from the room. The insult was breathtaking in its audacity. Ilara was no one's assistant. She was a quiet titan of the drafting department, the structural whisperer who translated Marcus's flashy, often impractical, visions into viable engineering. This task wasn't just beneath her. It was a public branding, a deliberate and cruel marking of her territory as insignificant. To underscore the point, Marcus picked up a cheap, plastic-wrapped cleaning cloth from a supply caddy and tossed it onto the table. It landed with a soft, insulting click, the sound echoing the shattering of professional respect. "Use this," the subtext screamed from the silent corners of the room. "This is your level. Know your place." Ilara's face remained a carefully constructed mask of neutrality, a skill she had learned was essential for survival. But beneath the surface, a familiar hurricane of frustration and anger began to churn. "Breathe. Just breathe. Do not let him see you bleed." It was a well-worn mantra. Her hand, hidden in the pocket of her blazer, curled instinctively around the cool, solid form of her grandfather's fountain pen. It was her secret anchor, a tangible connection to a legacy of quiet, honest work. She could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on her, some filled with pity, some with a disgusted shame. Ben Carter, standing just a few feet away, visibly flinched, his own face tightening with a helpless anger. The cheap cloth lay there on the vast, gleaming table, a pathetic symbol of her public humiliation, and the entire room held its breath, waiting for her response. The silence that followed was a living entity, thick and suffocating. It was filled with the unspoken thoughts of everyone present. The senior designers, men who had hitched their wagons to Marcus's star, developed a sudden, intense interest in their shoes or the distant, rain-lashed horizon. They were complicit in their silence, choosing the safety of allegiance over the risk of integrity. But the junior staff, the drafters, the renderers, the model makers, felt the sting of the insult as if it were their own. They knew They knew it was Alara's intricate calculations that had saved the tower's cantilevered terrace from being an engineering impossibility. They knew it was her name, buried deep in the technical files, that appeared on the solutions to the project's most complex problems. They knew Marcus was the face, but Alara was the foundation. Ben Carter's jaw was clenched so tightly a muscle pulsed violently in his cheek. He imagined striding forward, picking up the cloth, and throwing it in Marcus's face. The fantasy was vivid, satisfying, and utterly impossible. He had student loans that felt like a mountain on his back, and a deep-seated fear of the unemployment line. So he stood there, paralyzed by a mixture of rage and practicality, hating himself for his own inaction. With a grace that seemed to defy the gravity of the moment, Alara stepped forward. Her movements were fluid and deliberate. She completely ignored the cheap, disposable cloth Marcus had offered. From her own leather satchel, she retrieved a folded, pristine microfiber cloth, the kind used for optical lenses. It was a small but significant act of defiance. A refusal to use his tools of humiliation, a quiet insistence on her own standards. She began to wipe down the large, glossy presentation boards, her reflection a pale, determined ghost on their surface. She performed the menial task she had been assigned, but she did it with the meticulous care of a surgeon, elevating the act through her sheer professionalism. She would not be diminished. As she moved along the table, her path brought her alongside the master blueprint of the Solstice Tower, which lay unrolled on a secondary credenza. For a fleeting moment, her methodical cleaning paused. Her gaze, no longer that of a subordinate performing a chore, sharpened into the incisive focus of an expert. It was a look that Ben, watching her with a painful intensity, recognized instantly. It was the look she got right before she solved an unsolvable problem. Her eyes scanned the dense web of lines and specifications, and for a split second, a tiny, almost imperceptible frown creased her brow. It was a flicker of profound, intellectual disturbance. She had seen something that everyone else, in their rush to admire the tower's beauty, had missed. Marcus, meanwhile, had already turned away, accepting a compliment from a senior partner with a magnanimous nod. He had dismissed Alara from his mind as easily as flicking a piece of lint from his lapel. His arrogance had blinded him to the reality of the situation. He saw her silent obedience as proof of his dominance, not as the strategic, coiled patience it truly was. He believed he had put her in her place, but he had actually unknowingly placed his entire career directly in her hands. The boardroom finally emptied, the senior staff departing in a cloud of expensive cologne and nervous energy. A profound quiet descended, broken only by the soft hum of the climate control system. Alara was left alone in the silent, cavernous space, the towering model of the Solstice Tower looming over her like a silent, white judge. Marcus's final, parting instruction had been delivered with a smug wink. Make sure it's perfect for the clients, Alara. The first impression is the only one that matters. But Alara's focus was not on the lingering coffee cups or the stray documents left behind. Her entire being was focused on the master blueprint, lying there like a patient on an operating table. The flaw she had spotted was not a smudge to be wiped away. It was a cancer deep within the structure's bones. A fundamental, terrifying miscalculation in the specifications for the load-bearing joints connecting the tower's elegant upper spire to its core. It was a subtle technical detail, the kind of thing that would pass a dozen superficial reviews. But Alara, whose mind worked in the unforgiving language of physics and material stress, knew what it meant. Under the precise conditions of a once-in-a-century storm, the spire would not hold. The beautiful, iconic needle at the top of the tower would be vulnerable to catastrophic failure. She felt a wave of cold, professional dread wash over her. This was the inevitable result of Marcus's leadership. He prioritized dazzling aesthetics and aggressive timelines over the tedious, unglamorous work of rigorous engineering. He had undoubtedly seen the engineer's cautionary notes, weighed them against his deadline, and chosen to ignore them. She walked to the blueprint table, her footsteps echoing softly in the empty room. Her heart was not pounding with fear, but with a slow, steady beat of resolve. She could report it, of course. She could write a formal email, creating a paper trail. But she knew how Marcus operated. He would either dismiss her concerns with a patronizing pat on the head, or worse, he would steal her findings, task another engineer with the fix, and present the solution as a testament to his own diligent oversight. He would win either way. Doing nothing was not an option. The thought of people living and working in a building she knew was flawed was a violation of her deepest principles. So she chose the third path, the path of silent intervention. From her blazer pocket, she withdrew the fountain pen. It felt cool and heavy in her hand, an object of substance in a world of superficiality. It had been her grandfather's, an engineer who believed that a man's character was revealed in the integrity of his work. Unscrewing the cap was a ritual. She unrolled a clean sheet of architectural tracing paper, its crisp surface a blank canvas for the truth. She laid it carefully over the flawed section of the blueprint. For a single, charged moment, she hesitated. The voice of caution whispered in her ear, "This is not your place. This is a massive overstep. You could be fired for this." Then she looked at the beautiful, flawed design and thought of her grandfather. She thought of the unspoken promise that came with being a creator, to build things that would protect people, not endanger them. Her doubt vanished, replaced by a steely certainty. The nib of the pen, filled with deep black ink, touched the paper. Her hand moved with a speed and confidence that was breathtaking to behold. It was not the hesitant work of a drafter, but the decisive, fluid motion of a master. The lines she drew were not just corrections. They were an entirely new, vastly superior solution. She re-engineered the joint system, creating a design that was not only exponentially stronger, but also more efficient, subtly reducing the tonnage of steel required. It was an act of breathtaking brilliance, a solution born of pure, unadulterated expertise. Ben, having returned to retrieve his forgotten tablet, stood frozen in the doorway, cloaked in the shadows of the corridor. He had expected to find her sullenly tidying up. Instead, he watched mesmerized as she performed this act of quiet, high-stakes rebellion. He saw the vintage pen, an analog tool of truth, surgically correcting the fatal flaws of Marcus's digital, arrogant design. He didn't understand the technical specifics, but he understood the essence of what he was seeing. It was not sabotage. It was a rescue. With the delicate touch of a surgeon closing a wound, Ilara gently rolled the tracing paper into a tight, thin cylinder. She slid it, like a secret message, deep into the hollow core of the rolled-up master blueprint. Then, her face once again a mask of calm composure, she turned and began methodically to clear away the abandoned coffee cups. An hour later, the boardroom was transformed. The nervous energy of the internal meeting had been replaced by the heavy, expensive stillness that accompanied real power. The clients had arrived, a consortium of international investors led by a formidable, silver-haired woman named Ms. Albright. With them was the firm's co-founder and CEO, Mr. Alistair Finch. Mr. Finch was a relic from a bygone era of architecture, a man who believed a building's soul resided in its structural honesty, not its glittering facade. He had been semi-retired, but the scale of the Solstice project had brought him back into the fold. Marcus was in his element, a peacock in full display. His voice was a smooth, confident purr as he guided the clients through the presentation. He moved with the practiced ease of a man who believed in his own invincibility, gesturing to the gleaming model, the polished boards, the flawless digital fly-throughs. "And so, we offer you not just a building," he concluded, his smile radiating self-satisfaction, but a future landmark. A symphony of glass and steel. A polite, yet distinctly cool, silence followed. Then Ms. Albright spoke. Her voice was soft, yet it seemed to absorb all the sound in the room. A visually impressive symphony, Mr. Thorne. However, my independent engineering consultants have raised a significant concern. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. It's regarding the spire's lateral load-bearing joints and their specified tolerance under extreme meteorological events. Your data appears to be optimistic. The confident smile on Marcus's face didn't just falter, it shattered. For a horrifying instant, a wave of pure, undiluted panic washed over his features, his eyes widening in a brief, terrifying glimpse of the fraud beneath the facade. He quickly suppressed it, but the damage was done. The investors had seen it. Mr. Finch had seen it. Our simulations were exhaustive, Marcus stammered, the smooth purr of his voice now a desperate, reedy squeak. I can assure you, the structure is perfectly sound. I am not a gambler, Mr. Thorne, Ms. Albright replied, her voice glacially calm. And I am not interested in your simulations. I am interested in the primary engineering blueprints. I wish to see the schematics for the spire joints myself. Mr. Finch, who had been observing the exchange with a hawk-like intensity, now slowly turned his gaze upon Marcus. It was a look of profound disappointment and dawning suspicion. He had entrusted Marcus with the firm's legacy, and at this crucial moment, he saw a man drowning in his own deceptions. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Marcus felt a cold sweat prickle his hairline. With a hand that visibly trembled, he walked to the credenza and unrolled the master blueprint across the table. As the heavy paper unfurled, the small, tightly wound roll of tracing paper, hidden within its core, slipped out. It landed on the dark mahogany with a soft, almost inaudible rustle. It was a tiny object, yet in the cavernous silence of the room, it seemed to explode with significance. Before Marcus could react, before his mind could even formulate a plan to conceal it, Mr. Finch's hand shot out and picked it up. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a collapsing universe. Mr. Finch carefully unrolled the small, thin sheet of paper. He held it between his thumb and forefinger, angling it toward the light from the window. He was a man who had spent 50 years reading the language of lines and numbers, a language that could not lie. His eyes, the eyes of a master architect, scanned the hand-drawn, ink-black lines of Alara's design. The transformation on his face was a slow-motion drama. His initial curiosity melted into confusion, which was then replaced by a jolt of pure, unadulterated shock. Finally, his expression softened into something else entirely, a look of deep, profound, and astonished admiration. He held Alara's elegant, brilliant solution in one hand and looked down at the flawed, convoluted original on the table. He saw the lie, and he saw the truth. He lifted his head, his gaze bypassing Marcus completely, and scanned the faces of the stunned employees. His voice, when he spoke, was low and resonant, filled with a gravitas that commanded the absolute attention of everyone present. Who, he asked, his eyes locking onto every junior designer in the room, drew this? Marcus Thorne stood trapped in the wreckage of the moment. His mind, usually a whirlwind of quick-witted deflections and charming evasions, was a blank, roaring void. The lie. I did. It was an alternate study, formed on his lips but died before it could take breath. He knew, with a sudden, gut-wrenching certainty, that he could never replicate the genius on that small sheet of paper. The design was too clean, too intelligent, too honest. The room watched him, a jury of his peers, and he could feel their collective judgment shifting, the foundations of his authority crumbling to dust beneath his feet. It was in that stretched, agonizing silence that Ben Carter found a strength he never knew he possessed. He felt the fear, a cold metallic taste in his mouth, but it was eclipsed by a sudden, surging wave of loyalty to Illara and to the simple, decent truth. He took a single, shaky step forward. I saw Illara working on it last night, sir," he managed to say. His voice, though quiet, resonated with conviction. She was the last one to leave the office. Like a flock of birds turning in unison, every head in the room swiveled to face the back wall. Illara, who had remained a still, silent observer, found herself bathed in the sudden, intense spotlight of universal attention. Mr. Finch's gaze, sharp and penetrating, found hers. He held up the small sheet of tracing paper, a silent question in his eyes. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice now gentle, an invitation rather than an accusation. "Is this your work?" Illara felt a lifetime of being overlooked, of being underestimated, coalesce into this single, defining moment. She took a deep breath and stepped forward, out of the shadows and into the center of the room. Her fear had evaporated, replaced by a profound, quiet calm. "Yes, sir," she said, her voice soft but clear and unwavering. "I was concerned about the wind load calculations for the Spire assembly. I sketched a potential reinforcement." Marcus, seeing his last chance to salvage something from the disaster, lunged. "Exactly! I had tasked Illara with exploring several contingency plans," he sputtered, the desperation in his voice making the lie transparently pathetic. Mr. Finch did not even grant him a glance. It was the most complete dismissal Marcus had ever experienced. The CEO's full attention was on Illara. He walked slowly toward her, his expression a mixture of awe and self-reproach. He had almost let this incredible talent wither in the shadows of his own firm. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice filled with a newfound, profound respect. "This is not a contingency plan. This is not a reinforcement. This is a work of architectural mastery." He turned to face the stunned clients and the rest of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice ringing with renewed authority, "allow me to correct a grave error. You have been listening to the project manager. It is time you were introduced to the true lead architect of the Solstice Tower." Illara looked at Mr. Finch, and for the first time, allowed the immense emotional weight of the last 24 hours to show in her eyes. There was no triumph, no "I told you so." There was only a deep, validating relief. She met his gaze and delivered the simple, powerful truth that served as the epitaph for Marcus Thorne's entire philosophy. "A building has to be honest, sir," she said, her voice resonating with the quiet integrity of her grandfather. "Its strength and its beauty must come from its truth, not from the illusions we project." The words settled over the room, as solid and permanent as the foundation of the very building they were discussing. 6 months later, the culture at Finch and Sterling was not just changed, it had been reborn. The Solstice Tower was a magnificent reality, soaring into the Chicago sky. Its elegant spire, once a symbol of potential disaster, was now a celebrated icon of innovative design, a testament to Illara's quiet brilliance. But the most significant construction had happened within the firm's own walls. Driven by a renewed sense of purpose and a deep regret for his own past complacency, Mr. Finch had championed a radical restructuring. He had created a new, powerful division, the Structural Integrity and Innovation Unit. Illara, to the surprise of no one, was appointed its head. Her team, which she handpicked from the firm's most talented and overlooked engineers and drafters, was granted ultimate authority to review and validate every major project. Their mandate was simple: to ensure that the firm's work was defined by technical excellence, collaborative honesty, and ethical practices. It was a systemic cure for the disease of ego and politics that had nearly poisoned the company from within. Illara's story was published, with her hesitant permission, in Metropolis magazine. The article was not framed as a corporate takedown, but as an inspiring case study in institutional courage and the power of quiet competence. The piece went viral within the global architectural community. Finch and Sterling, once seen as just another corporate giant, was suddenly viewed as a beacon of integrity. Applications from the world's brightest and most passionate young architects flooded the firm's HR department. They weren't drawn by the salary, but by the chance to work in an environment where the quality of the work was the only currency that mattered. Ben Carter, now Elara's trusted deputy, watched her one afternoon as she patiently mentored a young drafter, pointing out the nuances of a complex joint design on a new project. He saw the same focus, the same respect for the craft that he had witnessed on that fateful night. The difference is, he later remarked to a colleague, is that now everyone sees it. She didn't just get a promotion, she changed the way we see. The firm's foundation was no longer just concrete and steel. It was built on the principle that the truth, no matter how quietly spoken, was the strongest material of all. In a soulless, beige-walled office in a less prestigious building across the city, Marcus Thorne stared at the screen of his computer, the numbers and words blurring into a meaningless gray haze. He had been laterally transitioned to a rival firm, a polite corporate euphemism for being exiled. His new title was long and meaningless. His reputation, once his most valuable asset, was now an invisible stain that followed him into every meeting. Everyone in the industry knew the real story of the Solstice Tower. Through his window, if he craned his neck, he could see it. The tower stood there on the horizon, magnificent and indifferent, a constant, shimmering reminder of his spectacular fall from grace. It was a monument to the genius he had tried to suppress, and it mocked him with its silent, soaring beauty. On his desk, next to a stack of uninspired project files, sat a cheap, plastic-branded pen. He picked it up, his fingers feeling alien and clumsy around it. He tried to sketch an idea on a blank notepad, a habit from his younger, more passionate days. But his hand felt leaden, the creative spark long since extinguished. There was no joy, no fire. His thoughts were not filled with a burning hatred for Elara. The feeling was something far more hollow and devastating. It was a profound, suffocating regret. But he didn't regret getting caught. He regretted the long, slow erosion of his own soul. He remembered the young man he had been, fresh out of architecture school. A man who truly loved the purity of design, the challenge of building something true and lasting. When had that man vanished? When had he started chasing the empty calories of praise and promotion, trading his passion for politics? His failure wasn't that Elara had beaten him. It was that he had defeated himself, year by year, compromise by compromise. When did I become this person? He whispered into the sterile silence of his new, smaller office. The question hung in the air, unanswered, a final, damning indictment of a career built on a foundation of sand. True strength is never found in the volume of your voice or the grandiosity of your ambition. It is not defined by the credit you claim or the titles you collect. It is forged in the quiet, solitary hours of dedicated practice, in the uncompromising pursuit of excellence when no one is watching. It is built, brick by brick, on a foundation of integrity. Real value is not projected. It is proven through the silent, undeniable evidence of your work. The final scene is set on the sun-drenched observation deck of the completed Solstice Tower. The city of Chicago stretches out below, a breathtaking panorama. Elara stands not with clients or executives, but with a young, nervous-looking female intern. They are looking out at the city, but Elara is pointing to a subtle detail in the steel joinery of the window frame. With a warm, encouraging smile, she reaches into her pocket and takes out the vintage steel fountain pen. She presses it into the intern's hand. "My grandfather gave this to me," she says, her voice gentle but firm. "He taught me that the best work always comes from an honest place. Now it's yours." The intern looks down at the pen, her eyes wide with awe and understanding. The pen, once a personal symbol of a solitary struggle, has been transformed into a legacy, a baton of integrity being passed to the next generation. The greatest victory isn't about exposing a rival or settling a score. It's about building something better, stronger, and more true in the place where something false once stood. It is about becoming so undeniably good, so fundamentally honest in your craft, that your work itself becomes the last word forever.